Welcome to Life in LA, a look at people and places in Lower Arkansas, our LA. Lower Arkansas is made up of the 15 southernmost counties in the state. Join us each week as we talk to some of the people who make this part of the world such an interesting place to live. And now, let's join Life in LA with our host, Steve Ford.
If you've listened to any of my last 27 episodes of Life in LA, the next voice you hear will be very familiar. I'm talking to one of my favorite people, one of the people I'm proudest of, my son, John Ford. John, welcome to Life in LA.
Hi, Dad. Thank you.
It's good to have you on the program. Let's hear that voice again.
The sound of the intro to Life in LA.
Welcome to Life in LA.
Welcome
yeah.
to Life in LA.
We're actually right now, well, before I get into the interview, tell us a little bit about you and your family.
My wife Lisa and I have been married for 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 4 children. 2 are grown and out of the house. My 2 stepchildren are grown and in Washington, and my stepson is a Cav Scout at Fort Riley, Kansas.
Oh, cool.
He followed his dad and his mom and my footprints into the Army. And then our 2 younger 2, Evelyn Sue and Ryan, both still home with us. Evie is 13, Ryan is 7, and they are both a handful, but they've been a trooper following me around the Army for their entire lives.
Now, this is an interview about life in Lower Arkansas, but we're not in Lower Arkansas right now. Where in the world are we?
We are currently in South Central Texas. We are about 2 miles away from the Alamo in the heart of San Antonio, Texas.
We are deep in the heart of Texas, but we're sitting out here on what looks like a horse ranch.
So you're looking at about 15 acres of South Texas pasture land that has been carved out of Fort Sam Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The stable that the horses are kept in, just 2 buildings over from where we're currently sitting, was the home of the Army pentathlon team in 1912. There is a good chance General George Patton kept one of his horses here at these stables. And the office building that is being renovated right behind you is the old veterinary hospital that dates from the 1800s.
That's something. What's really creepy about where we're sitting is right behind me there are 2 caskets and a caisson, but I think they're practice caskets, aren't they?
They are definitely practice caskets. They're a little more beat up.
There's no body in either of them.
No remains in either one.
Uh,
The wooden one is we had 3 caskets for a while, but the other wooden casket finally gave up on the handles where they're screwed into the wood.
We were talking about life in LA. You were born in Magnolia. You went to second grade in Magnolia, and you did 2.5 years at Southern Arkansas University.
And still proud to call Magnolia my home. That is my hometown. I am still an Arkansas resident. The Army has allowed me to keep my Arkansas residency, and I've got an Arkansas driver's license, and I keep the Arkansas flag on some of my stuff. But no, we moved away from Magnolia when I was almost 4 years old. My 4th birthday was in Africa. And then we came back for the year that I was in second grade. And then the next time I came back was I graduated high school, and I came back and gave Southern Arkansas University a run. No fault of theirs. Entirely my own fault that 2.5 years there and wasn't able to really get my life going in the right direction. So I wound up enlisting in the United States Army in the summer of 2001, and I shipped to basic combat training at Fort Moore, Georgia, in August of 2001.
When you were going through basic training, did you ever for a moment think you might one day be a drill sergeant?
Everybody wants to. All the privates have that moment of, I'd like to be a drill sergeant one day. That'd be nice to be on that side of the tape while I'm getting yelled at.
But that's tough work, isn't it?
It can be. Yeah. That was pretty late in my career that the Army decided that I met the criteria that they were looking for, and they were going to give me a shot at it. So they sent me to the U.S. Army Drill Sergeants Academy. I had 15 years in service at the time. I was there with folks that had 6 years in service, up to 15, 16 years. I was in the longer in the tooth category that were there as students. But the Army does a good job picking the non-commissioned officers that it sends to that academy. Mm-hmm. So we get a broad range of solid experience and young, fresh, unbroken.
Oh yeah, 15 years. You were in some pretty exotic places that time.
I did in the 15 years. My first duty assignment was the Republic of Korea. I went there while the invasion was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was watching it live on Armed Forces Network from Freedom's Frontier in Camp Casey, Korea.
Shivering up there
in the wintertime, and it's a temperate rainforest, so it's humid and hot in the summer, and it's icy cold.
Oh boy, the best of both worlds.
Bone damp in the wintertime. But I got back from Korea, went to Fort Campbell, and the 101st Airborne Division was still deployed for the invasion. I was worried I was going to miss my generation's war, so I waived my 6 months stabilization from coming from overseas and asked to be on the next aircraft that was smoking, headed into Kuwait. I caught up to the division a little after Thanksgiving. I did Thanksgiving in Kuwait that year, caught up to the division in Mosul, where 2nd Brigade, 101st Airborne had the city pretty locked down. It was a model city for the reconstruction efforts in 2003. I wound up doing 47 days of patrols on the streets of Mosul before we packed up and came
foot?
back. Foot and vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
I was a weapons company guy, so we had Humvees. But I did, to the guys that were there for a year from the invasion that crossed the berm from Kuwait into Iraq in March of 2003, and we got home February of 2004. And I felt a little bit guilty that I was wearing some of the same accoutrements that those guys are wearing. I've got a combat patch. I've got a combat infantryman's badge. And we thought that like the Gulf War, like the first Gulf War, Desert Storm, it was going to one and done. And then we got orders to go back for the 2005-2006 deployment. And I stopped feeling quite so guilty about my badges on my uniform.
I remember seeing one of your helmets that was pretty scraped up.
So I actually had a chunk of my helmet knocked out by an explosive device, an IED, improvised explosive device.
Where were you sitting when it went off?
I was in the turret of the Humvee. So the top half of my body was sticking out the top of the vehicle. I was sitting down, and there's a gunner's protection kit. There's a shield that wraps around it. The only part that really took any of the blast felt like a handful of dirt thrown by a very good fast pitch softball pitcher, caught me in the face, and then found out a couple weeks later that it had taken a chunk out of my helmet because of the way that the cover is. I couldn't tell until I dropped my helmet one day and the cover moved, and I thought, well, there's a scrape right there. Oh, there's a gash right there.
That's where you want the gash in the helmet.
And that's when I quit feeling bad about that combat infantryman's badge. Like, I feel like I've earned it now.
I think I've earned
it. I feel like
three tours in Iraq and then one in Afghanistan.
Yes, sir. I stayed with the 2nd Brigade 101st the whole time because they kept saying we were going to Afghanistan next, and I had not been. And so I re-enlisted twice for stabilization to stay at the unit where I was. And then as soon as I had raised my right hand and re-enlisted, they said, well, now they changed our orders. We're going back to Iraq. I've been to Iraq. I didn't want to go back to Iraq. Yeah. Finally got to go to Afghanistan, and during that deployment, I applied for and was selected to the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard in Washington, D.C.
The Old Guard.
Responsible for the defense of the Capitol, but primarily the ceremonial and special events unit.
And that's where you first started working with the horses?
That is the first time I saw the horses. I did not know the Army had horses. I got to the Old Guard, and I was the colors sergeant for Delta Company, so I carried the national colors. I did over 250 funerals on foot in Arlington National Cemetery in the processions.
Wow.
And the first time we set up for a full honors funeral, the full honors gets the horses as well. So we're set up waiting for the remains to come with the family on the hearse. And 4 guys in the same uniform I'm wearing, riding these giant black horses, pulling a carriage behind it, pull up to the transfer site where we're going to start the procession. Those guys are soldiers? How do you get that job? Whose job is that?
How can I get up there?
Where do I try out for that? I spent a year in the Delta Company carrying the colors because that's the deal. If you go there as a leader, you spend a year on the line before you can try out for the specialty platoons. But the 4 specialty platoons in the Old Guard, the Commander-in-Chief's Color Guard, the Salute Battery, the Caisson Platoon, the Sentinels at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, they hold tryouts 3 or 4 times a year, most of them. And when my year came up, the Caisson Platoon was holding a tryout, so I went down and tried out, got the chance to go to the training class, the 10-week basic horsemanship course that the Old Guard gives before you're qualified to handle a horse. Has a 48% pass rate. So of the students that come out and try it, now that 48% pass rate 80% of the dropouts drop out in the first week. That's ranch week. That's when, if you realize it's a lot more work than you think it is, there's ranch work, there's horse work, there's farm work. You're wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt, so it's a little more comfortable sometimes than a combat uniform.
I saw a guy with a broom and a dust pail following behind the horses at.
That is the crappier job associated with the horses.
You never had that. You never had that job.
I did. Everybody does it.
Oh,
I've had to follow the team with a shovel and a red bucket.
mm-hmm.
The black buckets are for food and water. The blue buckets are for cleaning supplies. The red buckets are for one thing only. And I've got big 44-gallon red buckets here that I use to clean the stalls out.
So you started riding horses at Arlington?
I did. I made it through the basic horsemanship course and became a squad leader for the Quezon platoon. And in the next 4 years that I was there, I spent 10 months as a squad leader, riding every chance I could because the platoon sergeant there told me he was going to make me the operations NCO. And the operations NCO is responsible for both of the barns that they have. They're responsible for coordinating the missions, for making sure that the teams have everything that they need, but they don't get to go into the cemetery very much. So every chance I could steal a saddle and ride, I'd ask guys, hey, you got something to do today? Let me ride in your spot. I've got nothing going on. So I managed to get 319 military full honor funerals on horseback, all 5 branches at the time. The Space Force didn't exist yet, but I've done Coast Guard, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Army.
I've heard you talk about, you've done some voiceovers and you've been you were on one of the national news.
CBS, Chip Reed. Chip
yeah.
Reed for CBS News interviewed me.
And I was so impressed by what you said about the importance of those funerals.
They are, every one of them is the most important funeral that we do that day. And that's a cultural aspect to it. That's something that the old guard has as a cultural touchstone in ourselves. We know some of those soldiers that have been there for 2 or 3 years, they'll have 400 or 500 funerals under their belt, but this might be your first, this might be your 50th, and it might be your 500th. That family gets one funeral. That departed service member has earned the right to it. We do for the departed, but the departed's not there to see the service. The service is performed for the family.
And you don't cut any corners?
We do not. Every single funeral gets the exact same attention and care because every single one is the most important one. Every time you go into that cemetery, you know you've got 4 of the most important funerals to do today. And if the 9 o'clock goes well, then the 11 o'clock has to be just as good or better. And if the 11 o'clock goes well, then the 1 p.m. has to be just as good or better. Same for the 3 p.m. Every single one should be better than the one before. And Arlington really has a well-oiled machine that they're running up there. The families, when they show up, they come to the visitor center, they get linked in with an Arlington National Cemetery representative, and the routes that they take and the transfer sites and the grave sites and everything, it's 700 acres. It's a big plot of green in the middle of Alexandria, Virginia. But
we were blessed to be there on Memorial Day once and see all the flags put out.
That is something too. Over 400 headstones there now. 400,000, I'm sorry. Over 400,000 headstones in Arlington now, and every single one of them gets a flag put in by the old guard.
You have a close friend buried there.
I do. Specialist Marlon Bustamante was killed by an IED 1 February 2006. He's buried in Section 60 with a lot of the other guys that died in the War on Terror. He's actually buried under headstone 8,319 in Section 60. Now, Section 60 dates back to Desert Storm era and earlier, so it's not
You often think about Arlington as former soldiers, but you go there and there's family who've recently lost someone.
There are living sections, and then there are closed.
Historic.
The historic and the closed sections are the ones that you'll see a handful of people come through because their grandfather or their great-grandfather, they know that he's in this section. They'll go to the famous graves. Willie Mays is buried in Arlington Cemetery. President Taft is buried there.
You've rubbed elbows with some famous folks, too, along the way while you're at Arlington.
I did. I had the honor to give a tour to Trace Adkins while I was up there, but I've also given tours to congressional delegations. I've given tours to the Chief of Staff of the Army and various allied nations, too, when they come and they get a chance to tour our stables. If you're ever in the Washington, D.C. area, Quezon Stables, you can find it on Google, the U.S. Army Quezon Platoon, and they are open for walk-in tours from noon until...
But you're just a little bit famous yourself, I believe. We were talking about the interview on CBS, and I've seen and heard you on some other places.
So And if you've lived in Lower LA for very long, you might have heard me on KVMA radio.
KVMA.
That was one of the last jobs I had before I joined the Army. I was there for a year, 2020, no, 2001 time frame.
Did you ever do the Friendly Show?
I did. I did the Friendly Show on Saturday mornings, not on the weekdays. But I also, so on the AM station, I had the Friendly Show, and then I had the morning and the midday. And then on the FM side, I had the 7 to midnight. So I was recording the 7
I had
to
that
midnight
shift
show.
one time, which I was finishing my degree, and it was very helpful because you're just playing music and you can do your homework and that sort of thing. You've done some narrations and voiceovers.
So the radio experience and obviously the genetics that I've inherited from you
After all, your own life in LA, you're the voice.
They have given me a voice and a face for radio, so I've got that going for me too.
Oh no, you got a good face. I always tell people I've got a face made for radio.
But no, I did a voiceover for the Old Guard, had a promotional video for the Washington International Horse Show, where Klinger, one of the caisson horses at Arlington, is the unofficial mascot for the Tragedy Assistance Program for survivors. And they were looking for a 2-minute video with some narration, some voiceover work. And I recorded that several years ago. I got here to Fort Sam Houston, and I've done several ceremonies. I did the 9/11 Remembrance Ceremony last year. I've done
We were here for that. And I wondered at the time, out of all the soldiers here, why did they pick you for the narrator?
I didn't volunteer for it. I narrated something. I don't remember what the first ceremony was that I narrated here that someone heard me. And
somebody called you up and said, we got a guy down in the horse barn.
It might have been the award ceremony for my funeral teams that rotate every 130 days. And so as they leave out from us, if they've done a good job, we award them to send them back to their units. And someone may have heard me doing that ceremony and said, there's our voiceover guy. I was honored to narrate the Gold Star Observance Day here on a Gold Star Observance. Mayor Nuremberg was present, several other VIPs from the community, from the surrounding San Antonio area, to help honor the families that have lost immediate loved ones to war. I've also had the opportunity to narrate over a video that was broadcast at the San Antonio Livestock Show and Rodeo.
Oh, I remember that.
We had an appearance. They brought my team in, and my team was able to ride into the arena, the main floor arena, which was a big deal for my guys. I've got a couple of guys with real wide brims on the front of their cowboy hat, very rodeo style, very bullfighter looking cowboy hats, and they were super thrilled to be able to do that. Fortunately, I had recorded the voiceover several weeks prior. I don't know if I could have done it watching my team out there on the floor.
Yeah.
My heart was in my
throat. Good to
throat.
have that pre-recorded. And of course, anybody that listens to this podcast, as I said, is accustomed to hearing your voice. So you've kind of gotten interested. You did an ad for Southern Arkansas University.
I did, my first paying gig. So that's, as I'm getting closer to retirement, I'm looking.
They sent you a check?
They did. They sent me a check.
Wow.
Super grateful to them. But I had a commercial that they're doing that is not, I don't think it's being broadcast yet, but they wanted me to do the narration for it based off.
And someone heard your voice on Life in LA.
Hearing my intro into your podcast.
Wow.
Got that.
Hey, we may be small town famous, but this podcast literally goes all over the world. It's fascinating to see where the audience is. I have people in Ireland, Portugal. What worries me is the number of people in Russia who listen. There's a small but loyal audience in Russia. What could they be thinking? I don't know. So horses and voiceovers, and you're nearing the end of your time in the Army. I forgot to ask your current rank.
I'm currently a sergeant first class. And I have been for 5 years. It is about time for me to get selected for promotion, but I have recused myself as best I can from that.
You don't want another 3 years?
If I get promoted again, I owe them 36 months from the date of pinning, and I have.
How old are you now?
I'm 43.
I can't have a son 43. That's not possible. So you're nearing the end of your time in the Army.
My official retirement request is being processed. It has not been approved yet, but it is.
Well, surely they'll approve it.
I would hope. They don't always. But I'm
He's
also
too valuable for us to let him go.
I am not one of the folks with a very niche job as an infantryman. There are almost 3,500 infantry sergeants first class that are as qualified as I am to
I thought
do.
one of the neat things you've done recently was firing that howitzer at the 4th of July salute. What was that all about?
Part of my responsibilities here at the Funeral Honors Platoon on Fort Sam Houston is I have the salute battery, which is 7 howitzers. 2 are in the shop currently, so I've got 4 that are operational. 1 sits at the flagpole. I have another that needs to go to the shop. When these 2 come back, I'll send my last 2 up there. But the one at the flagpole fires every morning and every evening for when the flag goes up, and it fires again when the flag goes down. Only on business days. It doesn't fire on the weekend or federal holidays. But part of the regulation for the Army that covers salutes, honors, and courtesy, which is the regulation that we use for our salute battery, includes instructions to the force that if your installation is capable of supporting it and you have the resources to do so, it is appropriate to fire a salute to the Union at noon on the 4th of July. The Presidential Salute Battery is the only other organization that I know for a fact does it. They fire in their dress uniform over a hill that's facing out toward Washington, D.C., so they have a little bit better of a view than I do. But Fort Sam Houston, Texas blessed me yesterday with a little bit of cloud cover about 30 minutes before we started.
Nice. It was because about 3 o'clock that afternoon, it was back up nearly to 100 degrees.
And we fired 50 rounds, 1 round per minute, from the base of the flagpole, alternating firing the howitzers, 2 guns, so that if a malfunction or one of the rounds didn't go or I didn't pull hard enough, then the guy that was out there with me would be able to fire.
And you did have 1 misfire?
I did. 1 misfire. I didn't pull the right direction, so part of the gun caught on itself, didn't allow me to pull the string back as far as I should have, but my partner up there had it in less than a second. He already had his round out, and I just stopped trying.
So 1 a minute for every state in the Union.
First round at noon, and then the last round at 12:49.
Wow. You know, you were right there beside it. We were a little bit further back, but you could literally feel the impact of that thing. It must have been well, you had on earplugs.
I did, and it was, it's considerably better on the other side of the shield, because as the blast is all going away from me, at the action of the piece, it is not nearly, like, I can't even feel it in my chest, but if
I've got a picture on my Nikon that I want to get off, but I don't have my laptop here to download it. Then maybe I can put that on the podcast. I need to go back and see if I can find. I bookmarked that CBS interview, and I think that the deal with the rodeo here may still be online somewhere.
The rodeo piece should still be on Instagram.
I'll see if I can. Oh, and then the Instagram deal that where they showed you. Yes, that was you. They filmed in uniform
for the video, putting the jacket on and pulling the gloves on.
That was a cool shot too.
It was a well done thing. We had one of our public affairs officers here, a big supporter of the platoon. She actually wound up getting married to one of the horsemen that I had here. He has since PCS'd. He's at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. But so she may have had a little bit of a vested interest in covering the platoon with some favorable news stories, but she had a heart for us and put that video concept together and storyboarded it and got a videographer to film it and cut it together really well.
So what's the future hold for John Ford?
So the requested retirement date is 1 June 2025. And beyond that is just an absolute open anything. No idea what I'm actually going to do. I've got a couple years to figure it out. There's a couple of things on the agenda to check into. Locksmithing has always been something that I've been interested in, just kind of as a hobby. And then when we moved to Texas, they came out and changed the locks on the house we were renting as a matter of policy. That rental company, when the brand new renter comes in, they send a locksmith out and he cuts the keys for the new place, changes the locks on it. Talked to him a little bit and asked him, what's your overhead? What's your hours like? And he's like, man, you can work as hard as you want to. You can make $15K a year, or you can make 6 figures a year, depending on the amount of work you're willing to put into it. So the lower end of that sounds a lot better for me as far as the work level goes.
You get to retirement and you just don't have the energy you did before.
I've spent 23 years putting in 6 figures worth of work on a yearly basis and not getting it. But.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, John, it's been good talking to you, kind of catching up a little bit, and we'll look forward to seeing what the future holds for John and Lisa and their brood of happy travelers.
looking forward to it. Thanks for having me this morning, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Life in LA. Feel free to contact us at steveford@gmail.com if you have a suggestion for a future topic. And as always, tell others about this podcast and share it on your favorite social media. You've been listening to Life in LA, a production of Steve Ford Photography.